It's not an often occurrence that you see a beloved franchise revisited over a decade after its last release, and have a new installment come out that perfectly encapsulates what everyone liked about the original. And it's even more rare to see that installment not only achieve that, but also build towards a new interesting storyline in a very natural way that doesn't take away from or degrade the original plot. And that is why, when I read Murtagh, I was completely blown away. This book is phenomenal. The Inheritance Cycle might be my favorite fictional book series of all time, and this latest installment is no exception. If the only thing you know about Eragon is that god-awful movie released way back in 2006, you are really missing out on an amazing series of books. I actually feel kind of guilty putting up footage from that garbage adaptation that does not represent what the series really is. But I've never covered a book before on this channel, so that's what you get, unfortunately. If they don't like it, they better hurry up and get this TV show up and running. So if you haven't read any of them, go read them. But I will say, I know what Christopher Paolini said, but Murtagh is not a good book to start the series with. It's going to kind of ruin the original on your first read. So go in order. And obviously, spoilers for everything in Eragon, so be warned. The first thing I noticed reading this book is that Christopher Paolini has become a much better writer since he wrote Eragon. The growth is beautiful. By the end of this book, it feels like he has managed to cram in, pretty naturally, almost as much character development for Murtagh as it took Eragon 4 books to receive. And to be fair, Murtagh is just, I think, objectively a more interesting character at his starting point. Plus, you've seen him before in the previous 4 books, so, he's already a little established. But, man, him and Thorn get so much to work with here. This book has a perfect amount of fan service. As much as I would have loved to see Eragon or Roran or anybody else again, really, they're not needed. This story stands on its own. Murtagh is easily a good enough character to carry his own franchise, honestly. He could have a whole series about him. And something I always respect so much in any kind of sequel or spinoff is when it's willing to really develop its own new protagonist before it starts leaning into what you already know. This is the perfect representation of that whole idea. There is just enough familiarity in the world and talk about the other characters that you really start to miss them. It's building anticipation further down the line for when you actually do see Eragon again, or you do see Roran. And it was just perfect, because it really made me appreciate just how good those characters were, because it's been a long time since I read The Inheritance Cycle. And as I read this book, and kind of remembered all the crazy stuff that was going down with those people, man, it really made me want to reread the series, and I definitely will after this. Characters like Roran, Glader, Eragon, and especially Braum are so compelling, and just being reminded about them in little moments throughout the story just really reminded me why I like the series so much in the first place. And speaking of talking about what came before, the amount of flashbacks and recapping here really strikes a good balance. It never overstays its welcome, but still gives you context of the original story through Murtagh's eyes. Those moments are just put to really good use for Murtagh and Thorn's character arcs here. It doesn't drag it down, doesn't slow it down. It's just perfect. And that really carries the first half of this book, I would say, because the plot doesn't really start to ramp up until the midway point when he actually travels north and finds the witch. Before we actually see her, I wasn't very interested in the villain, or that whole storyline, really, but I was still really enjoying the book because of how deep they went into Murtagh and Thorn. It's not lost on me how hard it is to really do justice to complex characters like that have done bad things, but, have been through so much, and just striking the balance of accountability to them and how much of it was due to the trauma and the things they've been through. It was just so beautiful. And I really love how Murtagh almost had something to prove at the start of this book, He almost was trying to be like the friendly neighborhood dragon rider, and I just kind of loved how he's getting dragged into basically doing side quests like fighting evil magic fish and stuff. His motivation for pursuing this whole plot is really great. He's stubborn, he's arrogant, he has so much pride and holds so much resentment towards Eragon.
I don't want to hear any more about Obi-Wan.
He feels like he needs to prove himself as a rider and, in a way, redeem himself. We could dig into this character all day because there's just so much there, And I think it was such a good decision to have a large power gap between him and Eragon, and it makes you see that in the previous books, he really had no idea what he was doing. He was just a prisoner forced to go out there and do his best without having any real knowledge of magic or what it means to be a rider. He is never prepared for any situation.
I yield. Please, no more.
He gets overwhelmed by pretty easy things, and it creates so much pity for the situation he was in the original series, having to go against Eragon with basically brute force that was given to him through the Eldenari. And Eragon is actually getting trained to be a rider and having a proper education. And what I love about this too is it's that sequel issue where they want to make a new thing, so they usually end up disregarding the main characters that came before and grinding them into nothing so that you can care about the new ones. But this book doesn't feel the need to do that. It's okay if Murtagh isn't as powerful as Eragon, because he's not supposed to be. And it just comes off as such an earned redemption at the end of Inheritance that after that, he's not just magically this great, nice guy who's over all his stuff, He may have helped Eragon because it was the right thing to do, but he still kind of hates him.
You don't hear a lie? What? I think you're great. You're my best friend.
You are the worst. I hate looking at your face. I want to smash it.
All the issues they had before are still there. He still resents him. He resents the fact that his name hasn't been cleared, even though he gave a lot to help. And I love the conflict set up between them here, because it's natural on both sides. Of course Murtagh would be upset about this, because who wouldn't be? How could Eragon not vouch for him after what happened? And it's believable that Eragon would basically overlook this because he was doing so much at the end of that book, and Murtagh just left. It'd be the last thing on his mind. And I think this sets the example of how to follow up a great series. Because, yeah, you can give, Luke Skywalker some flaws and say maybe he's not running things right. You can't make him worthless. You can say Eragon, even after all the development of the 4 books, he still makes mistakes. He still wasn't there for Murtagh when he really should have been. But it doesn't undo everything he ever worked towards, And it's a great transition for Murtagh as a character, going from an anti-hero to a full-fledged hero here in his own book. It's so easy to mess up a dark character and make them overly emo like Shadow the Hedgehog, or just make it like nothing ever happened and they're all just best friends now, And it really hits the nail on the head here. This is perfect. And the things Murtagh and Thorn go through in this book, I just wanted to beg Christopher to please stop developing them. They've been through enough. We understand. And it's just worse that it's all Murtagh's fault, Thorn doesn't want to do any of this. He doesn't want to go up to Now Gorgath, doesn't want to mess with Bushel or Bethel. And to see him get put back in imprisonment all because of Murtagh, it was rough. Especially after he went in depth on how the second Thorn was born, he had been tortured and thrown in fighting pits. All he's ever known is just complete torture and pain. It's a miracle that Murtagh and Thorn aren't absolute monsters. You're forgiven for killing Hrothgar, all that. It's understandable. Of course you would become hateful. And even the resentment for Eragon is understandable. It's like, Eragon had it rough in his books, but at least he was free, At least he had choices he was allowed to make, Murtagh had his whole reputation ruined, his whole sense of character ruined. He was forced to be a traitor over and over and just slaughter people. Like, man. Even at the start of this book, you just see he's been in this impossible position his whole life, where he's forced to betray the Riders, forced to betray his friend Eragon, forced to let his swordmaster friend die, who was the only person that ever cared about him. He gets Thorn and is forced to watch him be tortured from the second he was born. He's forced to torture the woman he loves, and forced to be a servant, leading these soldiers in this ridiculous war, and then feel guilty about the fact that he couldn't protect the soldiers on the wrong side of the war. Like, God, what is this guy supposed to do? And then seeing him get caught up in this whole almost replica of a situation again, when Thorn really just wants to go live out in the woods and, heal from their wounds, and what Murtagh is trying to do to heal himself leads them right back to where they were. And I love the way he went with these new villains. They fit so naturally into the timeline. They explain so much that was kind of missing an explanation in the first series. All the stuff about Galbatorix, going there and losing his dragon and trying to invade them even, and she repels them. It's all so good, and it does it in a way that doesn't detract from Galbatorix as a threat. I would think it's pretty lame if it was a reveal like, oh, Galbatorix was actually working for us the whole time, so you didn't really beat the bad guy last time. That would have been lame. And I'm really glad it's not what it was, Galbatorix went there, and in fact, this kind of makes Galbatorix more interesting retrospectively. Bushel has just enough hand in impacting Galbatorix without it being like he's working for her, because she does kind of get him to turn on the riders to meet her own ends, which makes her look better as a villain too. But then he does his own thing, and he basically kicks her out of the plot, and just goes for himself, and it makes both these villains way better. And I think it'd be very interesting if in the next book he even explains maybe like Galbatorix really wanted to dominate the whole continent because he knew these people were going to come eventually and try to stop everyone. So he kind of, he was evil, but he felt the need to unify everybody so that he had complete control so that he could fight back against this force that was clearly too much for him before. And just the way this expands on the system of magic is great. There's no forced... it's not like in, Hogwarts Legacy when you just have ancient magic that for some reason is different than real magic. I love this new faction of villains where they're basically from before time. They didn't even use the ancient language to do magic, so they operate on a whole different rule set. And it's just so unique and different while still making sense, not discrediting, the fact they have the name of the ancient language and all that stuff. The whole last act of this book just tied together so beautifully. The whole villain confrontation was great. It was extremely tense, and I honestly really thought that he might die at the end of this book, because I didn't expect them to defeat the witch in the first book. I thought she would be the villain of the series because she seemed so powerful. So when he kept going deeper and deeper, I was like, please, Murtagh, turn back. Don't do this to me. I can't take any more trauma from this book. He's been super reckless the whole book, and I was like, please learn your lesson. Leave and call Eragon.
Yeah, listen. We fucked up.
I really just am in love with the whole finale here. Him renaming Zarok is great. The creatures down there are cool and unique. The side characters in the last third of this book are also phenomenal. I love how Christopher Paolini has really fleshed out the Urgals throughout this series, and giving that blood bond with Murtagh to give him like somebody to actually be brothers with. I just love the whole thing. It's like the family you choose over the family you have. It was great. The girl who was in the cult and slowly broke away with help from him. Murtagh really just grew into the role of a dragon rider over the course of this series. And the way he frees her, her role in the final fight with grabbing the amulet and giving it to him, it's just, she wasn't just a helpless person standing by. She contributed a lot, and she felt like a real person. I just loved it. And Thorne's claustrophobia was done so well. I think it would have been really phony if, he just hadn't put that last part in where Murtagh is literally dying down there, and Thorne still can't just brush it aside and run down there. He almost lets him die because he is that afraid. And I love that that Urgal, who is a great character in this book, had to push him and force him to overcome this. And that last section of that storyline just made the whole thing seem so much more real. It would have felt kind of phony if he's struggling with this the whole book, but then they train on it a bit, and when it matters he just goes down and does it. But they added just enough hesitation to make it really hit home for me. The finale of the story was just so good. I was tricked into thinking he was actually going to die quite a few times, and I really didn't think he was capable of defeating all the enemies by himself. So as he kept making the choice to not turn and leave and try to come back with help from Arya or Eragon, my stomach was dropping, which is really a credit to the way that Christopher Paolini is actually willing to make the characters face the consequences of their actions. I would never have thought he would put Murtagh and Thorne back into a position of being tortured again after everything they've endured. And the fact he did made me start to worry the book was going to end on a very dark note. Just like this channel will if you guys don't subscribe. If you're still not convinced, let me tell you a little story that might change your mind.
And the other thing is, my sister had a baby, and I took it over because she passed away, and then the baby lost its legs and its arms, and now it's nothing but a stump, but I still take care of it with my wife, and it's growing, and it's fairly happy, but it's difficult because worth it in the end. True story.
Yes, very sad. Anyway.
The final fight between him and Bushel was also just incredible, and she's a great villain here. I love that her not using words for her magic makes her unpredictable and dangerous, and the mental battle at the end with them fighting in their minds while recklessly throwing spells at each other is just so awesome. And I especially loved the Force Lightning moment at the end. I'm super curious to see where Christopher takes his new storyline in the following books, and I'm once again hooked on this plot line and needing to release the next one ASAP. You know, if you had asked me before this book came out what I really wanted from the Eragon world, it definitely would have been like a Braum prequel, but now I think I'd rather see this story concluded before I see any of that stuff. I mean, that's how invested he got me in with this book. You know, in the aftermath, I actually teared up a little bit when Thorn was talking to Murtagh and telling him how he'll never fail him again, he'll never have to go into a deep, dark cave by himself after this. You know, that was just so wholesome and nice. And, you know, they have a little bit of friction in their relationship. And it really distinguishes it from Eragon and Sephiroth. But that was such a nice moment to see them grow together like that. And again, I got pretty emotional when Murtagh's on the bed and he's explaining to Najuwata how he was tortured and everything that he went through. Especially, you know, with how it's full circle with her and what he did to her. Just beautifully done. And Najuwata is such an interesting character. I really go back and forth on if I think she's going to be an antagonist in the future, because it almost seems political how she's embracing Murtagh now, because it doesn't seem like she spoke up for him after the events of the fourth book, probably because it wouldn't have been a smart move for her. And, you know, I'm sure she does have actual feelings for him. It seems heartfelt, you know, especially because we got chapters from her point of view in Inheritance. And especially because Eragon rejected her after hearing her ridiculous, you know, magic laws and stuff, and he's like, nah, I'm not helping you with this. I think she really wants Murtagh in the capital with her now because she thinks being associated with him is worth it, since there's so many people plotting against her that she feels like she needs the muscle and the image of a dragon rider by her side to kind of solidify her position. And I'm sure she's feeling the pressure of now the elves have a Dragon Rider ruler. Eragon is out with God knows how many Dragon Riders, training the next generation completely independent from her. And the dwarves and Urgles could have Dragon Riders soon. I think she really feels underpowered compared to everybody else, and that's half the reason, in my eyes, why she's actually letting Murtagh come back. And whether they take in the direction where she's an antagonist, or just, you know, a complex character that has, you know, dark and light sides, it's just very interesting, and I really like the nuances of their relationship. But man, they need to nail this Eragon TV show. Because especially right now, with the state of Star Wars and the MCU and just everything Disney touches, really, I mean, people need a new franchise, I think, to really take over. Like, there's never been a better time to really knock Star Wars and Marvel off the pedestal because they're kind of lacking at the moment. You know, as long as Eragon comes out with that TV show and it's a hit, it could really be the next big franchise of this decade, I could see. And Christopher Paolini has more of a hand in this, but he did say he's having to co-write it with people from Disney, so I just hope they don't insert their garbage and ruin this. But, you know, in Chris we trust, you know, he's our only hope at this point. And hopefully, down the line, this can turn into an Eragon open world video game. I mean, I want that so bad after reading this book and seeing the, you know, the evil fish and the things you could do with an open world Eragon game would just be insane. There's only like 2 things I really wish we would have seen a bit more of in this book, and that would be like maybe a page or 2 talking about what Murtagh feels about the fact that he killed Hrothgar for, you know, out of spite almost, and out of his pain. I think that would have been interesting to explore. And I think that there should have been more of a conversation between Thorn and Murtagh, once the book is over, essentially, about how Thorn feels that Murtagh led him into a trap.
Oh, that was a really well-constructed sentence. You should be an English professor at Cornell University.
Really not big improvements, just 1 or 2 pages for both of those things would have been nice. But other than that, no notes.
No notes.
No notes.
No notes.
No notes?
No notes.
No notes!
No notes.
No notes!
No notes. It's perfect.
And I'm sure I've mispronounced some names and stuff by the end of this video, because I don't know about you guys, when I read this book, when I've read any of the Eragon books, Murtagh's name to me is Murtagh. You know, I know it's Murtagh, but when I read it, that's not how I read it. I don't like the name Murtagh. He will always be Murtagh. Please let me know if I'm not the only one doing that. But there's a couple pronunciations throughout these books where I know I'm saying it wrong, but I just don't care. So, sorry if I said a couple things incorrectly. But that is going to do it for this one. This is the first book I've reviewed, so it might be kind of rough. Hopefully I'll get better at it with time. Let me know if you have any suggestions for me to cover things, and I'll catch you all in the next episode of HeadCannon.